The triumphant return of Halo on PC saw an explosion in interest towards the Halo series. People were coming back en masse to play Halo again, some coming back after more than 10 years, some playing for the very first time. Within a matter of days, Microsoft reported over 2 million sales on Steam. It was the best-selling game on Steam at the time. It was at the top of Twitch. It was half price day at the buffet and Microsoft was digging in. Halo had been locked in its own chastity cage for years, unable to receive the touch of any PC gamer. Halo Reach was the first to be deflowered by the strapping heroes of the PC gaming crowd as a part of the Master Chief Collection. The first two games were released on PC years ago, with subpar ports and Games Windows Live integration taking a royal dump on the whole affair. How was Halo received when it arrived on PC? Pretty much the same as it was received when it first dropped on Xbox. Besides, of course, Halo 4, which sits at a mixed rating on Steam, although when it launched on Xbox 360 it received very high scores. It seems that Halo has aged fairly well for the majority of people. Of course, many people are fans coming back to the games after however many years not playing Halo. The overall mood is, damn, these games aged really well. I remember when my friend who played Halo Reach for the very first time remarked on how good the game looked. Is it really 10 years old? He said. It really goes to show, mimicking reality is for nerds at computer graphics labs to do so we can see realistic meat tearing and the cum dragon. If you're making a game, specifically one you want to stand the test of time, you have to give it a definitive style, a clean and distinguishable look. Halo Reach was the first of all the Halo games to drop on Steam. But that's the issue, both because Halo Reach shouldn't have been the first to drop, and because the releases shouldn't have been so far apart if at any distance at all. The population was at its largest directly following the release of Reach. This isn't because Reach is the most hyped or most popular, but because it was the first game released on Steam. It was the first chronologically, but Reach, while fun, isn't the peak of Halo. Its issues have been known for years now. Many of the issues, such as the DMR, were only exacerbated by the accuracy afforded by keyboard and mouse. Many new players' experience of Halo was just getting dinked across the map by enemies whose in-game Spartans are quite possibly even less mobile than their real-life counterparts. And that's saying something. Halo Reach tanked competitive Halo. It was lucky to be carried by Invasion, Infection, Big Team, and custom games. Realistically, the most desired game was Halo 3. Releasing Halo Reach first was a baffling decision. Yes, it's first chronologically, but it wasn't the first to release. It wasn't the one people wanted the most, and it's not the one you should play first. Much of the stakes of Reach are lost on brand new players who have no clue what the Covenant are or what the Spartans are. Hell, they don't even have any clue why the game is called Halo. There's not a Halo in sight. There are two better options. A, they could have released Halo 3 first. It's obvious, it's the game everyone wanted and the one that historically got the most people interested in playing Halo. Yes, the story wouldn't have made sense, but the multiplayer is what will actually retain a population over a long period of time. Or B, they could have started with Halo Combat Evolved. Speaking of, there's probably a third option. C is that they could have just delayed it and released them all at once. But ultimately, people did eventually come back, at least temporarily. There was a population jump following the release of every game. Obviously, the release of Reach marked the beginning of Halo on Steam and thus had the most players, hitting over 90,000. Those numbers dipped fairly quickly, in February seeing a monthly peak of under 8,000 players. That's a peak. Halo Combat Evolved brought a few players back, hitting around 34,000. Again, Halo Combat Evolved doesn't acquire the longevity of other games. Halo 2 brought with it a larger jump, hitting about 45,000 players. It then evened out next month with a peak of about 10,000. Halo 2 was probably killed quicker than it should have been due to the game-breaking bugs which plagued it at launch. I do applaud 343 for fixing them so promptly, however. Halo 3 had the largest jump, to absolutely no one's shock. It was the best port as well. 343 knew this was the one they couldn't mess up. It hit a peak of around 54,000 players. ODST and Halo 4 jumped to around 30,000. I think this represents general community sentiment towards the games. Halo 4 has far more content, including a campaign, forge, and a full custom game suite. But Halo ODST is obviously more highly regarded. That is how the MCC player base subsisted for most of the first year of the game's life. Sporadic drops of existing games bringing people back, One issue is that a lot of people didn't know if or when these games were coming out. Some people even bought MCC at launch, assuming it would have all of the games. They were surprised to find out only Reach was available at the time, and never checked back when the other games were released. So it's fine and dandy that the collection gets population boosts from new AAA games being added every few months, but what happens after they're added? The population must level out eventually. It's been a few months since the last full game release, and the MCC population has had time to settle. It consistently hits daily peaks of around 10,000 players, dipping to around 3,000 during Aussie hours. That's when the population is at its leanest. That basically means every game is going to be against either X-Turd Monkey and X-Turd Monkey 1, that's his guest, or against Mint Blitz and the goddamn cyborg icicle jumping army. The game can hit up to around 14,000 on weekends. It seems as though the game is kind of dead. Is Halo just not relevant in the current year? It cannot sustain a population of a significant size. Now, let's compare this to, say, another FPS. CSGO, for example, and... Of course, this is a blatantly unfair comparison. CSGO is a Valve game, launched on Valve's own platform. I deliberately chose an example of one of the most successful FPS games right now. It launched in 2012. It's a newer game than Halo 3, that being the most played game in the collection. It has had constant updates since its launch, and hasn't had any major shifts, say, to a different platform. It's free to play and has an addictive gambling metagame. It's had years of constant updates to perfect its craft. In all honesty, it wasn't even that popular at launch. It was a fully priced game. After a few months, it leveled out to around 30,000 players on a monthly average. This actually isn't very good for a brand new game, but Valve managed to turn CSGO into an absolute monolith. Valve introduced Cases to CSGO in August 2013. Cases are Counter-Strike's microtransaction system. From that point on, the CSGO population increased quite significantly. The next big development was in December 2018 when the game went free to play. That's when it really took off to become the monolith it is now. CSGO has consistently gone uphill. Update after update, improving and rebalancing, adding new features. It's gotten to this point in no small part due to the effort of Valve and its community. Not to mention, they had Steam Workshop and map editing tools from very early on. When you look at all that, it should be no surprise why Halo's population is so low. I think it's important not to understate that last one. Mapping tools, and more importantly modding tools, are integral to the life of a game. Halo was fairly ahead of its time in bringing accessible rudimentary map-making tools to console, but it's very much behind on PC. User-generated content is a staple of PC gaming. Look at the popularity of CSGO surfing, Garry's Mod, and so on. For Halo, the real comparison is Halo Online and the El Dorito mod that emerged from it. You could do anything in El Dorito. There were no limits on the modding potential. For the few months before it was shut down, there was an explosion of different modes to play. The level of control you had available in Halo Online Forge mode matched or even surpassed that of Halo 5's. Halo MCC did come with some improvements over the base Forge, the addition of phasing and precision editing to Halo 3 for example, as well as the addition of any vehicle to any map, but it just pales in comparison. MCC modding is also very limited. It's basically just hex editing. No custom models or textures, until very recently, that is. There was a program developed by members of the community that allows for the addition of custom content, which is super exciting, but it's not quite there yet. Still no control over scripting, AI, navmesh, things like that. You can't create custom campaigns. You can't easily share custom content. There's no current way to discover other people playing custom content, no server browser. Speaking of missing PC features, why can't they add more quality of life features from other PC games? Join in progress, for example. Or what about the ability to surrender, to vote kick? Too often I've found myself in terribly unbalanced matches where the only choice is to leave. A 4v8 is no fun, and you shouldn't be penalised, excluded from matchmaking, for leaving a game like that. I think the collection still has a long way to go in that department. It still feels like a console port, like it's separate from other PC games. Having to log into Xbox Live doesn't help either. The population for each game was also hit hard by bugs. People logging in for the first day were shocked to find they were betraying teammates by shooting at the floor. This undoubtedly caused some people to leave and never look back. Bugs like these make the game completely unplayable. Beyond that, there are still unresolved issues. The co-op is just broken. I found it particularly so for Halo 2. But people have had problems with every other game as well. Freezing, stuttering, crashing. These things ruin the experience. Some of the games should have been delayed. All of these facts put together do not paint a pretty picture for 343's little pet project. Maybe Halo just isn't as good as you remember. It would be preposterous to suggest it wasn't a complete belly flop, leaving us winded, $50 poorer, and with a weird rash going down your leg. Right? It is a failure. Or is it? The Master Chief Collection is able to maintain a constant player base ranging from around 4 to 14,000. The tail end of 2020 saw the introduction of crossplay, essentially doubling the available pool of players. You can now find a match in virtually any game mode, although some, like Infection, can be tough to find matches in. In the main playlists, finding a game is actually fairly prompt, and I say this as an Australian. You see, population is just a number. Yes, it does reflect your available pool of matches and thus the quality, but 8 to 30,000 potential players is more than enough to consistently find fun and balanced matches, and it maintains this player base size. Sure, it doesn't have the unspeakable buzz that surrounds a massive title, but you can still play it. You can still find matches in almost anything, because as it turns out, Halo is fun. Halo is really fun, and it maintains a game population of this size without the promise of updates or rebalancing, just off the back of the original game. And that's the thing, Halo has not been updated. When you recognize that Halo 3, the most popular game in the collection, hasn't had a significant content or balancing update since 2009, it's actually an incredibly impressive population. Tell me another game that can pull these numbers without an update in over a decade, on a platform that it's not native to. Age of Empires 2 has an impressive player count for a game that's over 20 years old, but it's always been a PC game. And it was dead for ages, excuse my pun. It had a makeover in the Definitive Edition and just recently had a DLC release with new civilizations. It has had constant balance updates and a steady stream of new content for the past few years now. It has effectively rebuilt its player base. TF2 is another game that's comparable in that it launched in the same year as Halo 3, yet it has a massive player base. Well, that's because it had around 13 years on PC to build an audience. Beyond that, it's had significant updates on a regular basis. The last major content update was in 2017, and TF2 players do bemoan the fact that Valve isn't really supporting their game. But it still has bug fixes, rebalancing, and new content in the form of community maps, items, and weapons. Not to mention massive community efforts like TF2 Classic. TF2 is actually undergoing a renaissance of sorts. Its player populations are expanding drastically. TF2 has changed drastically since its launch. In fact, every popular game has. Look at Age of Empires 2. Look at CSGO. Look at Dota 2. Games are not static beasts, and ultimately, it's new content that keeps a game alive. That brings us to Halo MCC. And more specifically, Halo 3, because that's what people actually play. They are just beginning the process. Halo 3 on PC is still a relatively fresh thing, and it's still basically the same state it has been in for the last 10 years. But it's changing. The introduction of the Halo Online armors and soon the Halo Online maps is a step in this new direction. I do absolutely praise them for giving us the option to preserve the classic experience. But I also look forward to the future. 343 have not given up on MCC. I for one welcome this new content. In fact, I would like brand new original maps. They've also shown they are working on Halo modding tools, and members of the community are impressed by said tools. Halo mods do get some attention, but they're ultimately just hex editing, as I said. One modding wizard, Forerunner, has figured out how to inject custom models into the game. This is a huge step, like I said, but it's not complete control. With customs browser and mod support, the sky's the limit. Now is a time to look forward to the future as a Halo fan. Look how our faith has been rewarded. All the mods you could imagine. Endless custom games. Halo MCC needs new content. I was in opposition to the new armor changes for a while, but I realized new content is needed to grow the game. so long as we have the option to preserve the classic experience. Add new maps, add new rebalanced playlists, give us all the community maps you can, and rotate them through matchmaking. Halo on PC has potential, and once we have customs browser and modding, the game can never truly die. You're able to maintain some modicum of a player base when you give features like a server browser, which we hope the customs browser works similarly to. What about competitive Halo? Well, my philosophy is, if you build it, they will come. A competitive scene will naturally form around the game if it pulls enough players, if it generates enough buzz, if it's popular enough. Why do you think Call of Duty competitive exists? Fortnite competitive? Minecraft competitive? If you give them the options, they can figure out what works best. Halo could have a bright future ahead, so long as 343 doesn't mismanage it. And I know, saying that is like saying, so long as the politician I voted for doesn't lie. But this is a fairly simple task. You don't need to reinvent new systems for MCC. All you need to do is give us the features we want. The features that are already planned. Mods, customs browser, file search. Take your time, get it right, just don't mess it up. Now, how will all this affect Halo Infinite? Or rather, how will Halo Infinite affect all of this? Perhaps 343 fear that a thriving MCC may make people less enthusiastic on Halo Infinite. People already have the game they love. People might try Infinite, but if it doesn't blow their socks off, they'll just go back to Halo 3. 343 may be taking this kind of approach. Make sure all their eggs are in the Halo Infinite basket, considering it's going to launch on PC as well. They're clearly very invested in this thing, releasing it free to play, launching on PC and the console at the same time. I think this is the wrong approach. MCC will not detract from Infinite. MCC is Halo Infinite's advertising campaign. Halo just dropped on PC, where it doesn't have the time and established player base. Now is the time to convince people. Now is the time to get people to play Halo. Someone who enjoys Halo MCC is obviously going to be far more likely to play Halo Infinite. If 343 could stick the landing perfectly just once, it should be on this. Release a big update with a bevy of quality of life changes, features from more modern games such as vote kick, rejoining comp matches, surrendering, join in progress for social matches. Hell, even do the stuff Bungie never managed to do. Bots in multiplayer? Release some cut content from the vault? This is the platform for them to build a game community. They need to do it right. Halo could have a bright future if 343 only focused on Master Chief Collection and building rapport on the community through solid content updates. Halo may dwindle, it may wax and wane, but games like Halo 3 will always have an audience. Why? Because it's fun. It's that simple. Halo 3 is a solid game that hasn't aged a day. 343 has everything in place to establish a solid following. Now they just need to execute. If you thought this video was interesting, consider joining my Discord to discuss it further. Please subscribe and hit the bell for more Halo content. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.
I only have a handful of ships, Master Chief. It's a big risk, but I'm confident.
Hell, not again.
Emergency generators, now!
Shielding failed. They're down and charging.
As soon as they're up, re-establish contact with Lord Hood.
We're